Now bring in our international affairs commentator, Douglas Herbert. Doug, what exactly is in this article of impeachment?
Yeah, well, it's one article of impeachment as opposed to last impeachment in 2019. It was two articles of impeachment. Very straightforward, actually. It's an article in which it basically says that this president, if he's allowed to remain in power, will remain a threat to national security, democracy, and the U.S. Constitution, and he's acted in a manner that is grossly, these are the words of the actual article, that is grossly incompatible with self-governance and the rule of law. So that's the broad sort of framework of what this article says. It goes on to mention within the article of impeachment other things. What are those other things? One is the phone call that Donald Trump, the reported phone call of which there was a recording obtained by the Washington Post a couple of weeks back to the state of Georgia's Secretary of State, in which you hear Trump urging him to come up with the votes, the 11,780 votes that he needed to bring him over the top and win that state, despite everyone, the courts, the judges, the election officials having certified that Joe Biden fairly and freely in a free election won that state. It also mentions Trump's efforts, as the article sees it, to subvert and obstruct certification of the vote. That is the actual certification in Congress, and prior to that by the Electoral Congress back in mid-December. So subversion and obstruction by the president. Finally, it cites the amendment, the 14th Amendment to the Constitution, which basically prohibits any person who is engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the United States from holding office.
So then what happens?
So then what happens? Well, he's impeached. What does that mean? We've talked about this before, right? We had a lot of sort of chats about what impeachment means back in the first time around. A lot of people falsely believe that impeachment means he's out of there. It's not that. The impeachment is the first part of a two-stage process, the second stage being the trial in the Senate. What happens today is, think of the impeachment in a sense. It's a political process. It's not a criminal trial, what's happening today. It's merely a vote. But what the vote does is it essentially certifies or formalizes. It's a statement of charges, essentially, the charges which I just told you about a few moments ago. So it's a statement of those charges. It's a little bit equivalent to an indictment in criminal law, even though, as I said, this is not a criminal process. It's not a criminal trial in the House. Then we go into abeyance, and then there are all those big question marks that people far wiser and more clever than myself are having a lot of trouble answering. What happens next? We have a strong indication that there'll be no Senate trial before the inauguration on January 20th. How do we know that? Because Mitch McConnell, who is currently still, for a few more days at least, the Senate Majority Leader, has said that he is not going to reconvene senators until January 19th. That's one day before the inauguration to hold a trial. So it's almost certain that if a trial, if it is held, and the article sent to the Senate, it will be after the inauguration. How long after? We don't know.
You know, Donald Trump, we had the insurrection on Capitol Hill last week.
Yes.
Since then, Donald Trump has been kicked off Twitter, suspended from other platforms. In this 1 week, has he shown any sign of contrition?
He's shown no contrition, no remorse. In his recent statements before he flew off to the Alamo, to the border wall in Texas the other day, is basically he thought his remarks were totally appropriate. He still thinks of himself as being the victim of the greatest witch hunt in the history of presidents. What's interesting here is that more and more Republicans, though, are making the opposite calculation, which is why we're seeing cracks in the fissures of Donald Trump's Republican stronghold base within Congress. I'm not talking about his rank-and-file supporters. I'm talking about within Congress. All along the way, all throughout this presidency, what has been the basic calculation here? The basic calculation Republicans have been making is it more politically costly for me? It's a very cynical calculation. Is it more politically costly for me to abandon Donald Trump or to stick with him, given perhaps the consequences now? In the wake of these Capitol riots, the insurrection by marauding thugs, that's the term I'm using, and I stand by that term. In the wake of that, it is becoming harder and harder for Republicans to justify defending Trump, or they're questioning whether or not Trump's political capital is so much depleted, his brand is so much depleted by this, that supporting him right now runs a greater risk than abandoning him, which is why we're seeing a trickle, which could become much stronger in the coming hours and days, of Republicans breaking ranks and saying they're inclined to vote with the Democrats on impeachment.
Better late than never. Doug, thank you very much for that. Douglas Herbert there.